First question is, how, when, and why did you first become involved in the JFK assassination case?
You start with simple questions. Um, that's a very complicated question. I mean, I am an old walrus with lots of warts and scars and terrible experiences to recount. Uh, the I don't know if you want to start with that. I put that thing up
Okay.
for a second. Well, okay. Ask me the question again.
Okay. When did you first become involved or interested in research or studying the JFK assassination?
I think my involvement first began to kick into gear sometime in '72, '73, in the period primarily of the Watergate scandal around Nixon. Up until 1964, 65, a couple years after Kennedy was killed, I was still working in the military-industrial complex. I ran a technical publications department at the Aerospace Systems Division of a major defense contractor in Ann Arbor. And at night I put on my bib coveralls and wrote plays. But what I basically was a technical writer in the defense business. That's how I made my money. And I didn't have a lot more time to spend thinking about political issues than anybody else did. But when Kennedy was assassinated, I think it hit my whole generation with an incredible ferocity. Besides the normal feelings that you feel confronted with any violent, traumatic death, there was the whole other layer of meanings given off by the fact that the man was the president, and in that respect he was a member of everybody's family. So the trauma was generalized throughout the culture, and I was just as vulnerable to it as the next person was. It shook me up, to put it in words of one syllable, and made me start thinking about what were the forces actually working in this country. Uh, but then, in a way, that it was unforgivable of me to do that, and I look back at that period and I think, say, 64, the year 1964, as being one in which, along with a whole lot of other people in the United States, I lived in false consciousness. But the thing that was bringing me into a real sense of collision with my government was not the assassination, but what followed from it, the dramatic, huge escalation of the Vietnam War. Now, having studied that period from a great distance and with the benefit of documents that were at that time super secret, I think I can say that Kennedy was killed because of the Vietnam War, because he didn't like it and he wanted to pull us out, and he was about to do that. In any case, whether that was why he was killed or not, the fact is that the war started getting bigger after he was dead and Johnson was the president. And I saw that very clearly in my job in the defense business. And this, in a sense, asked me to put two and two together, and so I started getting suspicious, not so much about the Kennedy assassination, but about our government itself. And without going through a big rigmarole about that, the result was that in 1964, late 64, early 65, with my wife and 3 kids in tow, I left my job in the defense business and went off to be something called the research director of Students for a Democratic Society. That is to say, I joined the movement against racism, which was at that point in the process of becoming a movement against the war as well. It needed a war, of course. It needed the war to be escalated, but the escalations came in that period, 64, 65. This was a period of enormous escalation. You could see the warehouses starting to bulge. You knew that if you knew anything about reading the military news, you knew that a major gearing up was underway. So I started getting very worried about the war along about this time, and through a completely ridiculous set of coincidences, I wound up coming into contact with people of Students for a Democratic Society. And we started talking, and we liked each other, and my wife got involved, and she liked the SDS kids, and the SDS kids liked her, and we all became a very happy family there in Ann Arbor, and pretty soon the question was, hey, Oglesby, what are you doing in the defense business? Why don't you get out of that? Why don't you come over in the movement? And I'm answering, well, I've been wondering that question to myself, and okay, let's try it. So I left my job, not knowing really what was going to happen, to go into SDS. In SDS, 1965-66 period, I was the national president of the thing, and therefore on point a lot in terms of the debate about Vietnam. By 1969, 1970, I had become enough of a historian of the war to realize that the death of Kennedy represented an enormous milestone in the war's history. Up until the Kennedy assassination, what we had in Vietnam was a very low-key operation confined to special forces units who were operating in terms of providing assistance to South Vietnamese military units and to village structures, but not to be directly involved in combat. Of course, they were becoming very directly involved in combat, and some coffins had come back home. But until this period, the period of Johnson, we were not looking at a war in Vietnam. We were looking at a police action, as it was called in Vietnam. We were looking at a low-level special forces operation. We were not looking at something that was going to involve Fort Benning and the Air Force and the Navy. Now suddenly, well, it wasn't so sudden, but it happened quickly, and within a period of a year, the transition from small police-style operation to large military-style operation at division levels of force, that transition was so far along that there was no longer any question what Johnson's intention was. He would escalate the war as much as he needed to and could get away with, and that spelled trouble not only for the poor Vietnamese, but for the poor Americans who were going to have to bear the burden of this terrifying and idiotic struggle for objectives which were in the first place hard to define, and in the second place impossible to defend. There was nothing on the line for us in Vietnam. It just seemed as though we were fighting the war to prove we could do it. But then that became a very powerful motive for those who felt they had to prove they could do it. Suddenly, the war in Vietnam was the showplace and the proving ground for American military deterrence. And if we could not show the world, that is to say the Soviet Union and Red China, that we were capable of deterring the aggression of an insignificant, indeed third-rate power like this third world country of Vietnam, how in the world then did we expect ever to intimidate the Soviets, who were so much more capable in the Vietnamese? So this became the logic of the war, and it was just to prove we could do it, in other words, that we were laying waste that nation, throwing napalm everywhere, bombing from way up in the air with using those B-52s, where there are no targets when you're a B-52 5 miles up in the air. You just open the bomb bay at a certain point that your stopwatch gives you and let the things fall. Whoever's down there gets killed. So this is a terrifying situation to watch unfold, and you finally start wondering how it happened. How did this come about? How did we get in this predicament? That's when the transition from Kennedy to Johnson started looking extremely important, and that's when I started studying it. By the middle of the 1970s, I had made myself something like a passable expert on the Kennedy assassination. I had linked up with 6 other guys who in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that's where I'm from, who also had studied the war because they were of the war generation and studied Kennedy and Johnson and the Kennedy-Johnson transition. and who wanted to make something out of it, who wanted to talk about what actually went on in the assassination of Kennedy. Was this simply a stroke of accident? Was it as if lightning had hit the guy on the golf course? Or was this a considered political act that was fraught with political and historical implications for us and the people of the world?
So in a nutshell, it's basically that your interest in the Vietnam War and the causes of the Vietnam War made you to suspect that the primary motivation for the murder of JFK was so that war could go. And that instilled an interest in you and energized you into research activities. I know this is a very complicated case. It's difficult to ask simple questions. It's very difficult to have
Oh,
concise answers.
The simple questions are easy. I'll
yeah.
take the mic and show you how easy it is to ask a simple question. You get over here and answer.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, answering is what's hard. We're dealing with enormous history and issues that are extremely important.
What do you feel your most important contribution to to clearing up, to making a better picture of an understanding for the people of their own history to this case is?
I think the best thing that I've done on the case was to be an organizing member of the Assassination Information Bureau, because that was a group that from the beginning understood the Kennedy assassination as a political act, from the beginning wanted to put it into a political and historical context, and from the beginning wanted to raise people's awareness of the evidence of conspiracy in Kennedy's death. It looked indeed, to put the final point on that the assassination of Kennedy was the first act of the escalated Vietnam War.
So in other words, it's also the ultimate of dirty tricks, and that these people could see that they could profit by this and that they could get away with this and never be caught, and therefore connections through all these other scandals are, their idea might have been, well, we got away with this, we can do what we want and we won't get caught again. Now I've read Who Killed JFK, and then recently I luckily found a copy of the Yankee and Cowboy War, and I read that. And maybe you could speak to a little bit of the connections between the people, between not necessarily a direct connection, but the perhaps coincidental people who are in common in both the JFK assassination and the Watergate situation.
I'm not going to answer that. No way, because I would be be talking for a half hour and barely get warmed up.
Well, let's forget that one. I have a better one.
Yeah, find an easy one. Find a one with yes and no.
Of all, well, that's tough. A lot of times there are no yes or no's. But of all the investigators, public and private, and the people that you've seen, the private researchers over the years, and maybe some of the people in the actual government investigations, the House Select Committee in particular, who do you think are the, in your eyes, the most important researchers who may have, sort of like a top 10 list? It doesn't have to be 10 people, but
I'm not
who do you...
I'm not going to do that, David, either.
You don't want to do that?
These are my comrades, and I'm not going to...
You don't want to leave anybody out? Okay, that's
well,
fine.
I'm not going to put the wrong people in either.
Right.
I just don't want to do that.
Okay, now here's a
Let
yes.
me just
Here's a
say-
yes or no.
Well, let me
Go ahead.
say to that point that
Okay.
a lot of people have played very important roles, and each one of them is something of a cripple, as I am myself. I mean, good God, we are all of us just poor, two-legged human beings crawling around on the face of the earth and trying to understand the world that confronts us. So the effort to find the truth in the Kennedy assassination, since it was so absolutely abandoned by the government itself, has fallen to those who can pick it up and who are willing to do so. So the lame, the crippled, the halt, the blind, the deaf, we have all assembled as a collection of, well, if not partial fits, misfits and partial fits, to put together as we can a composite picture of what happened. Maybe that's just the way the real world works. But in any case, I could not begin to rank or rate the researchers. So many people have been important, sometimes for just a moment, for just a relatively small set of facts. Other people have been important for a longer period and have been, in a sense, organizers as well as researchers. But it's not something where you can compare people's batting averages.
I understand. Do you think, and here's a yes or no to some degree, Do you feel that because of the failed government investigations and the people's lack of confidence in the job they did, which spurred on so many private researchers to discover so many important facts in the case, do you feel that there's anything to be served by having another investigation, perhaps a special prosecutor now, when the files come out and we have a little bit clearer picture of what's going on here?
Somebody has to read the files. Somebody has to make sense of what they say. Somebody has to make a list of all the insights that can be gleaned from reading the files. Somebody has to put together a list of the implications that can be checked out. I mean, getting the things released is just the beginning of the problem. The real issue is to get them read by people who know how to read them, and then to get the results of the reading disseminated to the people who know what to do with the results, to researchers who will be able to see new lines of investigation and that sort of thing. I mean, I'm all in favor of making these files public because I just can't understand how the government can justify keeping them secret. I mean, my goodness, the stuff is getting on to 30 years old. How many, and the Cold War is over. What are we afraid of? We never, in the movement to get the truth in this thing, by the way, we never thought that it was somehow our problems with the Soviet Union that persuaded the government to keep material about the Kennedy assassination secret. That had little to do with it, if anything at all. It seemed much more likely that what was being protected was some area or arm of the U.S. federal police capability. That is to say, the people who ought to have investigated this case properly. That seemed to be the seat of the cover-up. The FBI helped to cover this thing up. And that right away put this case in an extremely special category.
Now, it seems today that I get the impression that the AIB either never ceased to exist or is in a revival stage now. Is it a continuous thing?
No,
Has it been in existence all this time?
No, it hasn't. The AIB is one of the few organizations I know about that ever declared itself a success and therefore over. In 1976 period, when the Congress was beginning.
Considering the what little evidence we have seen and has been pried loose from the files and has been unearthed by all these private investigators, do you think that the evidence tends to indicate that Lee Harvey Oswald was an operative of U.S. intelligence?
There's a strong shadow of a suggestion of that in the evidence, but I think it would be really going further than the documentation as we currently see it would permit us to say that. It's an intriguing possibility, and it certainly puts the Kennedy assassination itself in a very dramatic new light if we are to find out 30 years after the fact that Oswald was somehow a secret agent of the United States government at the very moment of the assassination. But I hasten to add that no one has come close to proving anything like that. What has basically happened to create a stir in the research community is the final fastening of some attention on a certain Department of Defense card, an 1173 card, DD 1173, that was found in Oswald's possessions. And the argument is now being made that the fact that he had this card meant that he had some continuing relationship with the government after his apparent dishonorable discharge. It looks as if his discharge might have been just a sheep dipping, as it's called, to give him a sort of a new identity as basic to the beginning of his career as a counterintelligence agent of some kind. That's the thesis put in starkest terms that's now being considered about Oswald. But I stress that the indications in the evidence are not strong. They're too strong to dismiss. We have to get to the bottom of this DD 1173 business. We have to see if our assumptions are correct or incorrect as to what his having that card meant. There are other things in Oswald's career and his life as of the assassination that arouse people's suspicions that he might have had a continuing intelligence role with the U.S. government right through the assassination. But this is all certainly in the level of speculation, and no one has come anywhere close, in my view, to proving it.
Okay, and because of the incredible complexity of the case, it's very difficult for the average person without a lot of study to get any understanding of this confusing array of characters and circumstances. And many times, I've talked to researchers, and they complain that a lot of times that when they're in an interview, they very rarely get asked what they think are pertinent questions or deep questions or important questions. If you had one question that you wished they would ask you, what would it be?
What would you do? That's my question. What should we do? Here's all this evidence of conspiracy in the assassination of a president. Everybody believes it. The whole world believes Kennedy was killed by a conspiracy. What are the figures in the United States? Somewhere around 75, 80, even into the 90s, if you exclude those who have no opinion. I mean, it's huge. There has never been an issue in the political life of this country, I wonder if in the political life of any country, on which so many people have been of such a common mind for so long against a position which is insistently imposed upon them by their government. Now, what to do about this? It seems as though there's a permanent standoff between the people who are not going to believe the official lies about Dealey Plaza and the government, which maybe sometimes would like to come clean, but which is scratching its head over the question of what are the consequences of coming clean? What if coming clean means, for example, let's just put it in very stark terms, what if coming clean means that the whole world is going to find out that some combination of mafia, FBI, and CIA people put together the Kennedy assassination? Now, we know what we should be doing about the mafia. Sometimes we try to do that anyway. What in the world are we going to do if evidence points to official branches of the American government? What do we do if the CIA somehow gets implicated in this case, or the FBI? Somehow it seems to me that this unspoken fear of the immensity of the consequences of the truth has created or motivated this peculiar situation where we all know that there is a 500-pound gorilla sitting in the corner, but nobody is going to say a word about it because we don't know what we could do.
And this leads to one final obvious follow-up question. If you take that concept into today in contemporary society, and instead of you being me, let's say that you're Clinton, and apparently he patterns himself after and idolizes JFK. Does the president have the power to challenge this? And if you were him, or if you were advising him, do you think there's anything he can do to not necessarily crack the case, but make it a little clearer so we're not cheated of our own history?
I tell you one thing that he could do that would right away ease the pressure and make people feel better. It would be to say that he understands this case, and he too, like Al Gore, can see that there is evidence of conspiracy. I mean, it's already a great relief to have Gore saying what he did a few weeks back, I guess before the election actually, when he said that he thought there was evidence of conspiracy in the assassination of the president. To have a guy in his position say that is a great relief to the people as a whole, because it tells the people, wow, good, we were afraid there that one of us was nuts, and no matter which one it would have been, it spelled trouble, right? I mean, either the people are nuts or the leadership, and you don't want it either way. So there was no win.
I guess the question is, what can he do, what should he do? I know it's maybe no answer to that.
Yeah, I know it is a very tough answer, but I tell you, he can do something. First of all, he can say more explicitly what he has begun already to say, and he can pick up the direct language of his vice president. He can let us know somehow that he sees what we see, he feels what we feel, he understands what we understand. He's a human being like the rest of us out here, and it does seem to him there is evidence of foul play in Dealey Plaza. Next question, what to do about that? Okay, we're going to have another investigation, another Warren Commission. Is it going to be a people's tribunal? Is it going to be outside the government altogether that he would try to set something up? Or would he back off and say anything I touch because I'm president is suspect, let the people handle this, let the people put up a commission of inquiry? I don't know what he could do. I think that there are very few options. None of them look really good. But I suppose in the end, you come out thinking that the only sane thing to do about the JFK case is to set up a special prosecuting office in the Justice Department committed to full and utterly honest exploration of the case. That office should have representation on it from the critical community, because you just can't get away without it. This case needs the expertise of all these independent researchers and analysts who have given of their lives to this case. They have compiled a sense of it, a feeling for its issues, which you could not possibly duplicate in the best staff of lawyers in the world who had no previous experience on JFK. So I think that's what should be done. I think that Clinton should say, yes, people, I understand why you're worried about this. I'm worried too. Let's see if together we can find out what really happened then. And then after that, we'll know what needs to be done maybe, and we'll work out the next step. But let's start with a full-scale investigation, staffed in some way as to give a certain level of guarantee that it is going to be honest and it's not going to be compromised from within. And let's see how that works. Give a group like that 6 months, a year to work on the question. Let people come and testify. Let there be open hearings. And then let there be a careful, sober, sustained analysis of the results and a report. And let the report say, well, after all, it turns out the guy was killed by a lone nut. And we looked at all these different problems here, and gee, yes, they're suspicious, but when we looked into them, they turned out not to be suspicious. So, wow, that saved us a terrible national crisis, and now we can all go back to regular life. Now, if that could be said, and could be said convincingly, the American people who are not idiots would breathe a great sigh of relief. Even fools like me, who have, gone out on point in this question, would be very happy to have the questions reliably, honestly, and completely answered, would be happy to say, oh, well, okay, if Marcello was this, if the no ammo clip was that, if, et cetera, through the various issues in the case. If we found answers for these things, we could say, okay, at last we have answers, and therefore we'll sit down and shut up about it. On the other hand, if such a study were to find incontrovertible and unavoidable evidence of conspiracy, then you got a scary situation. A high-level conspiracy it would have to be, otherwise it couldn't have survived so long. Probably, in certain respects, an inside job comprising elements of the government as of that period. What is the implication for our institutions? Are we going to have to, as JFK said he wanted to do, smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter them to the winds? Well, what if that happened? Could we do that? Can the forces of democracy play the forces of the clandestine state? It sounds like it would be a pretty messy situation. And I think, given that most people, most of the time, are pretty hard-headed realists, at least about troubles to get into, there must be some sense in the country, and this is just my guess, there must be some shared intuition among the citizens who say conspiracy and the government which says no conspiracy, that this is really the best solution. Let the government keep saying no conspiracy mindlessly, stupidly. Let the people